Daniel had always considered himself a man of routine. After long days working at the local library, he found comfort in the quiet rhythms of his small home at the edge of town. Every evening, without fail, he and Max, his golden retriever, would take a slow walk around the yard before settling down for the night. Max was the kind of dog whose warm wagging tail and easy smile could soothe any worry away. But tonight, something was different. It was just past sunset when Daniel heard it, the first bark. Sharp, urgent, and unlike any bark Max had ever made. Daniel paused mid-step, his brow furrowing as the sound sliced through the calm evening air. Max's bark wasn't the happy, excited noise Daniel knew so well. It was almost desperate, filled with a strange intensity that sent a chill down Daniel's spine. He called out softly, "Max? What is it, boy?" But the dog was already sprinting toward the edge of the property, tail stiff, ears perked up. Without hesitation, Daniel grabbed his flashlight from the porch and followed. The woods that bordered Daniel's backyard were familiar territory. He had explored them many times as a child, and often walked there with Max. Usually, the woods were a place of peace, where sunlight filtered softly through the leaves and birds sang their evening songs. But tonight, the woods looked different. Shadows hung heavier, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. Max darted into the underbrush with quick, purposeful strides, his bark echoing oddly through the growing darkness. Daniel's footsteps crunched on the dry leaves scattered across the forest floor. The smell of earth and pine filled the air, but something else, something unidentifiable, lingered beneath it. A faint metallic tang, maybe, or the scent of something long forgotten. As Daniel pressed deeper into the forest, he noticed Max wasn't just barking aimlessly. The dog moved with intention, stopping and starting, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air. Daniel's heart beat faster. Was Max sensing a wild animal? Or was there something else out here, something unseen? The path grew narrower, tangled, with vines and fallen branches. Daniel's flashlight beam flickered against the bark of ancient trees towering over them. The light caught glimpses of small eyes reflecting back in the dark. Perhaps raccoons or owls, but no immediate threat revealed itself. Still, Max's barking grew more insistent. Suddenly, Max froze, ears rigid, staring at a spot ahead. Daniel followed the dog's gaze but saw only thick brush and the faint outlines of trees. Then Max barked again, this time a sharp, piercing sound that seemed almost unnatural. Daniel swallowed hard and took a cautious step forward. There was a strange stillness now, as if the forest itself was watching. The usual sounds of rustling leaves and chirping insects had fallen silent. Even. The wind seemed to have stopped. A sudden noise, a soft rustle, came from the bushes to Daniel's right. His breath caught. Max growled low in his throat, hackles rising but did not move. Daniel shined his flashlight toward the sound. The beam landed on something half buried in the dirt, a glimpse of metal glinting faintly. He moved closer, brushing leaves aside, and saw what looked like the edge of an old rusted box. Curiosity overcame fear. Carefully, Daniel knelt and began to clear the dirt and debris around it. Max sat close, eyes alert, tail flicking anxiously. The box was heavier than it looked, cold and rough beneath Daniel's fingers. As he lifted the box from the ground, a sudden gust of wind swept through the trees, carrying with it a whisper of something almost like a sigh. Daniel's heart pounded louder. What had Max found here in the dark woods? Holding the box close, Daniel turned back toward home, Max trotting steadily by his side, his ears still twitching nervously. The woods behind them seemed to return to their normal quiet, but Daniel knew things had changed. Whatever was inside, that box was important, and it was waiting for him to uncover its secrets. The sun had nearly disappeared below the horizon, leaving behind a fading glow that barely penetrated the dense canopy above. Daniel's breath came in shallow bursts as he followed Max deeper into the woods, the eerie barking still ringing softly in his ears. The forest, once a place of calm and familiarity, now felt alive in a way that unsettled him. Shadows stretched, like dark fingers, twisting between the trunks of towering trees. Max led confidently, his nose low to the ground, darting around fallen logs and patches of brambles. Daniel's flashlight cut a narrow path through the gloom, illuminating pockets of moss and the occasional glimmer of a spider's web. The air grew cooler, damp with the scent of earth and decaying leaves. Every so often a distant owl hooted, but otherwise silence reigned. An unnatural, heavy silence. Daniel tried to shake the uneasy feeling settling in his chest. He told himself it was just the forest at night, that Max had probably spotted a wild animal or smelled something unfamiliar. But the dog's bark had a sharpness to it, a note of urgency Daniel couldn't ignore. As they moved further in, the ground beneath their feet grew uneven, roots twisting through the soil like the veins of some ancient creature. The forest floor was littered with broken branches and the remains of last season's leaves, which crunched softly under Daniel's boots. Max stopped suddenly, ears pricked, and barked once more. A short, sharp sound that echoed strangely among the trees. Daniel scanned the area with his flashlight. There, just beyond a cluster of ferns, he spotted something unusual, a patch of disturbed earth, as if something had been recently unearthed or buried. His pulse quickened. Curiosity pushed Daniel forward. He knelt down and brushed away loose leaves, revealing a rusty metal clasp, part of a box or container perhaps. The faint glimmer reflected in the flashlight's beam. His fingers trembled slightly as he dug carefully, uncovering the corner of the same old box Max had found near the edge of the woods. Max barked again, standing guard, his golden fur almost glowing in the faint light. Daniel's mind raced. What was this box? How had it ended up buried here? And why had Max reacted so strongly? Suddenly, a cool breeze swept through the trees, carrying with it the scent of something sharp and metallic. Daniel paused, listening intently. The woods were too quiet now. No birds, no insects, just the distant rustle of leaves and the steady drip of moisture from the branches overhead. Then, from somewhere deeper in the forest, Daniel heard it. A faint, almost inaudible sound like soft footsteps, crunching leaves that stopped abruptly. His heart jumped into his throat. He called out, "Hello, is someone there?" But only the silence answered. Max growled low in his throat, his body tense, muscles coiled and ready. The dog's instincts told Daniel this was no ordinary night, and whatever was in the woods was aware of their presence. Daniel shone the flashlight toward a narrow path veiled in shadow, barely visible between the trees. Without really thinking, he took a step forward. Max bounded ahead, tail high, barking to announce their approach. The beam of light caught a glimpse of something half-hidden, the twisted remains of what once might have been a wooden fence or structure. Daniel's mind flashed back to old stories he'd heard growing up, tales of families who had lived nearby, decades ago, disappearing without a trace, leaving behind only broken fences and empty homes swallowed by the forest. As he moved closer, Daniel spotted strange symbols carved into the bark of a tree, a series of lines and circles that made no sense to him, but seemed deliberate, as if marking a boundary or warning. A sudden snap of a twig made Daniel whirl around. Max growled louder, hackles raised. But there was nothing, only the whispering wind moving through the leaves. Despite the fear tightening in his chest, Daniel pressed on, feeling the weight of the box in his hands. It was a link to something old, something hidden, and he was determined to uncover it. The dog's bark echoed again, more urgent this time, drawing Daniel's eyes ahead to a faint clearing where the last light of day struggled to reach the ground. Max stood at the edge, staring intently into the shadows beyond. Daniel took a deep breath, the chill of the forest creeping through his jacket. This was no longer a simple walk with his dog. Whatever lay ahead was a mystery, and Max's eerie bark was the only guide into the unknown. The forest seemed to hold its breath as Daniel and Max approached the clearing. The faint light filtering through the dense canopy was barely enough to illuminate the tangled roots and thick underbrush. But something unusual caught Daniel's gaze, a soft, almost otherworldly glow emanating from the center of the open space. Max stopped at the edge, tail stiff, eyes fixed on the glowing source. His barking had quieted to low whines, filled with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Daniel took a tentative step forward, the crunch of leaves beneath his boots sounding unnaturally loud in the heavy silence. The glow pulsed gently, casting strange shadows across the clearing. Daniel's flashlight flickered, but the glow didn't come from his beam. It was something else entirely, mysterious and alive. His heart thudded in his chest as he moved closer, drawn by an invisible force. There, half buried beneath a thick layer of moss and fallen leaves, lay an old metal box, weathered and rusted, yet somehow still intact. The glow seemed to seep from cracks and edges, faint but persistent. Daniel knelt beside it, his fingers trembling as he brushed away the debris. He could feel the weight of history in the object. It was heavier than it looked, cold to the touch and humming softly as if it held secrets waiting to be uncovered. Max sat obediently at his side, eyes never leaving the box, ears twitching with alertness. Daniel's thoughts raced. How had this box remained here untouched and hidden for so long? And what was causing the strange light to shine from it? The woods, which moments ago had felt ominous and threatening, now seemed charged with anticipation. He reached for the latch, hesitating for only a moment before flipping it open. Inside, he found a collection of old photographs, yellowed letters, and a small leather-bound journal. The pages of the journal were brittle but legible, filled with neat handwriting that seemed almost frantic. As Daniel carefully turned the pages, a story began to unfold, a story of a family who had lived in the area nearly a century ago. The journal spoke of happiness and hardship, love and loss, but also of strange happenings in the woods. The entries mentioned flickering lights, unexplained sounds, and an increasing sense of being watched. Max growled softly, sensing the tension in the air. Daniel looked up from the journal and around the clearing, suddenly aware of the stillness that had returned. The glow had faded, replaced by the dimming light of dusk. The forest was waiting. Suddenly, Daniel heard a faint rustling behind him. He turned sharply, shining his flashlight toward the noise, but saw nothing, just the swaying branches and shadows. Max barked once, low and warning, but didn't move from his spot. The feeling of being observed grew stronger. Daniel's mind raced with questions. Who had left the box here? Why had the family disappeared? And what was still lurking in these woods, watching from the shadows? The journal hinted at answers, but left many questions unanswered. The family's last entries were hurried, filled with fear and urgency. They spoke of a presence in the forest, something that seemed alive and intelligent, something that didn't want to be found. Daniel closed the journal gently and looked down at Max. The dog's eyes were bright, alert, and full of trust. Together they had uncovered a mystery that had lain hidden for decades, but the story was far from over. With the box secured under his arm, Daniel began the slow walk back toward home. The forest seemed to close in around them once again, shadows, stretching longer as night approached. But Daniel no longer felt the same fear. Instead, he was filled with determination. The discovery had changed everything. What had begun as a strange bark on a quiet evening had led him to a secret that demanded to be uncovered, and he was ready to follow wherever it led. Back at home, Daniel set the old metal box carefully on the kitchen table, the soft hum of the evening quiet contrasting sharply with the pounding of his heart. The warm light of the overhead lamp flickered slightly, as if echoing the strange pulse he'd felt in the woods. Max settled at his feet, tail wagging slowly, but eyes fixed on the box as if guarding it. Daniel took a deep breath and reached inside, pulling out the stack of brittle letters first. Their edges were curled and yellowed with age, and the handwriting was delicate, looping elegantly across the faded paper. As he unfolded the first letter, a faint scent of old ink and earth rose from the pages, stirring memories of a time long gone. The letter was addressed to someone named Margaret and dated nearly 90 years ago. It spoke of daily life on a nearby farm, of hopeful dreams and worries about the coming winter. But as Daniel read further, the tone shifted. The writer described strange noises in the night, unexplained lights in the forest, and a growing unease among the family. Each letter built on the last, weaving a tale of increasing fear. The writer mentioned neighbors disappearing and strange symbols found carved into trees around the property. Despite their efforts to understand, the family seemed trapped in a slow, unraveling mystery. Daniel's fingers trembled as he set the letters aside and pulled out the old photographs. The black and white images were faded, but still showed clear. Faces, smiling children, a proud father, a mother holding a baby. They seemed ordinary snapshots of a family living simple lives. But in one photo, Daniel noticed something odd. a shadowy figure lurking just at the edge of the frame, barely visible but unmistakably there. His breath hitched. Could this be connected to the strange happenings in the letters? Max shifted, nudging. Daniel's hand with his nose sensing his owner's tension. Next, Daniel picked up the leather-bound journal, its cover cracked and worn. He opened it to the first page and began reading aloud softly. "We have lived here for many years, but lately the woods have changed. The night no longer brings peace, only whispers and shadows. Strange lights flicker between the trees, and the children are afraid to play outside after dark. We feel watched, as if the forest itself is alive with eyes. What once was familiar is now something to fear." The entries grew more frantic as Daniel continued, describing nights filled with eerie sounds and fleeting glimpses of something moving just beyond sight. The final pages were hurriedly scrawled, warning of an approaching danger and a desperate hope to escape whatever was haunting the woods. Daniel felt a chill crawl up his spine. The words painted a picture of a family terrified and trapped by forces they could not understand, forces that may still linger in the forest around his home. He glanced at Max, whose ears perked and eyes searched the shadows beyond the window. The dog had never shown such alertness before, as if he too was connected to the mystery in some way. Questions flooded Daniel's mind. What had happened to this family? Why had the letters and journal been hidden away, buried in the forest? And was the presence they feared truly gone, or waiting for someone else to uncover its secrets? Determined to find answers, Daniel decided he needed help. He wouldn't be able to unravel this alone. Tomorrow, he planned to visit the local historical society and speak with older residents who might know more about the vanished family and the strange legends surrounding the woods. But tonight, as the wind whispered against the window panes and the box sat quietly on the table, Daniel knew one thing for certain: the discovery had changed his life. What had begun as a dog's strange bark on a quiet evening had opened a door to a past filled with fear, mystery, and secrets that refused to stay buried. The box wasn't just a container of old memories. It was a key to a story that demanded to be told. And Daniel, with Max by his side, was ready to listen. The next morning dawned grey and heavy with mist, a quiet mirror to Daniel's restless thoughts. The box and its contents lay spread out on his kitchen table, casting long shadows as the early light filtered in through the curtains. Max sat nearby, occasionally glancing toward the woods, as if expecting something or someone to appear from the fog. Daniel had barely slept, his mind replaying the journal's desperate entries and the images captured in the faded photographs. The family's fear, etched so vividly in their words, felt as real now as it must have been back then. It wasn't just history. It was a living, breathing presence that pressed down on Daniel's shoulders, haunting his every thought. Determined to find answers, Daniel dressed quickly and grabbed the box, deciding to take it with him. He had to know more, had to understand what had happened to the family, and whether the strange occurrences in the woods were still ongoing. His first stop was the town's historical society, a modest building filled with dusty archives and old photographs lining the walls. Inside, the air smelled of aged paper and forgotten stories. Daniel explained his discovery to the elderly librarian, Mrs. Wilson, who listened intently, her eyes widening as he unfolded the letters and showed her the journal. "This family?" she murmured, her voice low and cautious. "The Thompsons, yes? They lived here a long time ago. Their story is, well, it's part of local legend now." Daniel leaned in. "Legend? What happened to them?" Mrs. Wilson sighed deeply, settling into her chair. "They disappeared, all of them, without a trace. The entire family vanished one night, many decades. There were rumors, strange lights in the forest, eerie sounds and sightings of shadowy figures. Some say the woods took them. Others believe they left to escape something they couldn't fight." Daniel felt a shiver run down his spine. "Did anyone ever find out what caused it?" "No," Mrs. Wilson said, shaking her head. "The forest keeps its secrets, but some townsfolk say the Thompsons weren't the only ones. Families before them too, gone. The woods have long been whispered about, but few dare to speak openly." As Daniel absorbed this, a sudden chill swept through the room, making the hairs on his arms stand up. Max growled softly at the door, ears pricked. Daniel glanced outside, spotting a shadow flit past the window, too quick to be a person, too deliberate to be the wind. He rubbed his eyes and turned back to Mrs. Wilson. "I need to see if anyone else remembers more, anyone who might have stories or clues." She nodded slowly. "There's one person you could talk to, Mrs. Henderson. She's lived here her entire life and knows the town's history better than anyone. Be careful, though. Some things are better left undisturbed." Thanking her, Daniel left the Historical Society with a sense of urgency. The day felt darker now, as if the woods themselves were reaching out to pull him deeper into their mystery. Max trotted beside him, alert and tense. Later that afternoon, Daniel found himself on a narrow, winding road leading to the outskirts of town, where Mrs. Henderson's weathered farmhouse sat among towering oaks. The old woman greeted him with sharp eyes and a cautious smile, her hands calloused from years of hard work. Daniel explained his discovery, showing her the letters and journal. Mrs. Henderson listened silently, her gaze drifting toward the distant woods. "They always said the forest was watching," she said finally, voice low and steady. "Not just watching, waiting. My parents told me stories when I was a child. Stories of lights that danced between the trees, voices that whispered your name when you were alone. People disappeared, just like the Thompsons. Some never came back." Daniel's heart pounded. "Do you think it's still happening?" Mrs. Henderson nodded grimly. "I believe it is. The woods hold something ancient, something that doesn't like being disturbed. I've felt its presence more than once. You and your dog have stirred things up, and it won't let go easily. That." Night. Daniel sat by his window, the journal open on his lap, Max lying close by. The forest loomed beyond the glass, dark and silent, but alive with secrets. Daniel knew he was no longer just an observer. He was part of the story now, entwined with the past and the mystery that still haunted these woods. As shadows lengthened and the wind whispered through the trees, Daniel felt the weight of history pressing down on him. The past was not gone. It was watching, waiting, and somehow it was reaching out to him. That night, sleep evaded Daniel entirely. The heavy weight of the mystery pressed on his mind, each creak of the house and rustle, outside magnified by his unease. Max lay at the foot of his bed, ears twitching, alert to sounds Daniel couldn't quite hear. It was as if the dog knew that the forest wasn't done revealing its secrets. Unable to stay still, Daniel rose quietly and pulled on a jacket. He grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside into the cool, damp air. The sky was thick with clouds, the moon hidden behind a veil of mist. The woods lay just beyond his backyard, dark and ominous, but calling to him with a strange, irresistible pull. Max was immediately alert, sniffing the air and growling softly. Daniel followed the dog toward the edge of the trees, the beam of his flashlight cutting a narrow path through the shadows. The earlier stories, the letters and the warnings echoed in his mind, but Daniel's determination outweighed his fear. He needed to see for himself. As they moved deeper into the woods, the familiar surroundings seemed twisted by the night. Branches clawed at his jacket, and the scent of damp earth and moss was sharp and raw. Max's bark broke the silence suddenly, a sharp, urgent sound that made Daniel's heart jump. Ahead, a faint glow shimmered between the trees. Daniel's breath caught. It was the same soft, pulsing light he had seen in the clearing days before, the strange, otherworldly glow that seemed almost alive. Max stood rigid, growling low, eyes fixed on the light. Daniel stepped cautiously forward, flashlight in hand. The glow seemed to come from a small clearing, the source obscured by thick vines and fallen leaves. As he pushed the foliage aside, he gasped. A faint outline of the old metal box lay half buried again, but this time it looked different. The glow was stronger, almost like a heartbeat in the dark. His fingers brushed the box's surface, and a sudden cold surged through his hand. A low humming filled the air, vibrating through the ground and into Daniel's bones. He looked down to find the box's latch slowly unlatching itself, creaking open to reveal its contents once more. Inside, nothing seemed changed. Only the journal, the letters, and the photographs. Yet Daniel felt as if the items themselves were charged with a strange energy, pulsing faintly with the glow. Suddenly a whisper brushed past his ear, a soft, urgent voice that seemed to carry through the wind. Daniel froze, eyes scanning the darkness. "Daniel," the voice seemed to call, faint and distant. Max growled louder, his body tense and ready. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. He whispered, "Who's there?" Only silence answered, but the forest felt alive, watching, waiting. Daniel gathered the box carefully and turned back toward home, Max following close behind. As they retraced their steps, the glowing light faded, swallowed by the thickening night. The forest returned to its usual shadows and sounds, but the sensation of being watched lingered like a weight on Daniel's shoulders. Back inside his house, Daniel locked the door and set the box on the table once more. He glanced at Max, whose golden eyes reflected both caution and trust. Daniel knew the night had changed everything. Whatever was in those woods was not just history. It was present, alive, and aware. And now, it had reached out to him. Determined not to let fear take hold, Daniel resolved to dig deeper. The letters and journal spoke of a family trapped by something ancient, something hidden beneath the roots of the forest. He would find out what, no matter the cost. Outside, the wind whispered, through the trees once more, carrying with it a faint echo of barking, a sound eerie and familiar. The following morning dawned with a fragile stillness, a thin layer of mist hanging over the sleepy town like a delicate veil. Daniel sat at his kitchen table, the worn journal open before him, its brittle pages now familiar, but still filled with mystery. Max lay curled at his feet, restless but watchful. The events of the night clung to Daniel's mind, the glowing box, the whispered voice, and the eerie feeling that the forest's secrets were closer than ever. Determined to unravel the truth, Daniel set out with a plan. First, he would return to the local library, hoping to uncover historical records, maps, or old news clippings about the Thompsons and other families who had vanished. Then he intended to explore the forest again, this time with a recorder to capture any unexplained sounds, and perhaps even a camera to catch whatever might lurk in the shadows. At the library, Daniel sifted through archives, flipping through fragile newspapers yellowed with age. After hours of searching, he found a series of articles from decades ago detailing the disappearances of several families around the outskirts of town. The stories were strikingly similar, families living peacefully one day, only to vanish without a trace the next. Witnesses reported strange lights, howls in the night, and eerie shadows flitting between the trees. One article caught Daniel's attention. It mentioned a local legend of the Watcher, a mysterious figure said to haunt the forest guarding an ancient secret. The Watcher was described as neither man nor beast, a shadowy presence that appeared when the forest was disturbed. It was said to be both protector and punisher, keeping intruders away, but sometimes luring the curious deeper into the woods, never to return. Daniel felt a chill but pressed on. The journal's last entries hinted at a hidden place deep in the forest, a place where the family believed the source of the strange happenings might be found. He resolved to find it. As dusk fell, Daniel prepared for his night expedition. He packed the journal, a flashlight, his phone with a voice recorder app open, and a small camera. Max seemed to understand the importance of the journey, his tail wagging faintly, but eyes sharp and alert. They entered the woods just as the last light faded. The forest seemed to close around them, dense and alive with sound. Daniel followed, Max's lead, trusting the dog's instincts more than his own uncertain sense of direction. After what felt like hours, they came upon a section of the forest marked by the strange symbols Daniel had seen carved into the trees days earlier. The air here was thick, heavy with a strange energy that made Daniel's skin prickle. Max growled low and stopped, his nose to the ground. In the center of a small clearing lay a stone altar, ancient and covered in moss. Carvings on its surface matched the symbols on the trees, circles intertwined with lines and dots, patterns that seemed to pulse faintly in the dim light. Daniel's heart raced. This was the place, the heart of the mystery. As he approached the altar, his flashlight flickered and then went out, plunging him into near darkness. Max barked sharply, and Daniel fumbled for his phone's light, the beam cutting weakly through the gloom. Suddenly, a cold wind swept through the clearing, carrying with it a soft whisper that seemed to echo all around them. The voice was the same as before, calling his name, urgent and pleading. Daniel's breath caught. Then from the shadows beyond the clearing, a figure emerged, not fully solid but shimmering, half seen. It was tall, cloaked in darkness, with eyes that glowed faintly like embers. Max growled fiercely, stepping protectively in front of Daniel. The figure spoke in a voice both distant and clear. "You have come far, Daniel." "The forest remembers. The past is not lost." Daniel swallowed his fear. "Who are you? What happened to the Thompsons? To all those who disappeared?" The figure's eyes seemed to soften. "They were bound to the forest, protectors of its secret. When the balance was broken, the forest took them to guard what lies beneath, the source of its power and its curse." Daniel's mind reeled. What is this source, and why did the forest choose them? The forest is alive, ancient beyond your understanding. It protects itself through those who belong to it. The Thompsons became part of its eternal watch. You have awakened what was meant to remain hidden. A sudden realization washed over Daniel. This wasn't just a tale of loss, but of guardianship, sacrifice, and a secret power older than the town itself. The figure began to fade, whispering a final warning. "Respect the woods, Daniel. The story is not over." As the figure disappeared, the clearing fell silent once more. Max nudged Daniel gently, as if urging him to leave. Daniel took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what he'd just witnessed. The forest's mystery was more profound and more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The silence that followed the fading figure's warning hung heavily over the clearing. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest, the adrenaline of the encounter slowly ebbing, leaving behind a profound stillness. Max stayed close, his golden eyes scanning the shadows, alert but calm. For a moment, it felt as if the forest itself was watching, waiting to see what Daniel would do next. The truth was now undeniable. The forest was alive, a living entity with a secret as ancient as the land itself. The Thompsons and the other families who had vanished had not been victims. They were guardians bound to protect the forest's mysterious power. Daniel felt the enormity of that responsibility settle over him like a cloak. He turned to leave, but his feet felt rooted. A deep, almost primal connection stirred inside him, a voice rising from the depths of his being. The forest was not just a place to be feared. It was a place to be respected, nurtured, and, if necessary, protected. As they made their way back toward the edge of the woods, Daniel's mind raced. What did it mean for him to have awakened what was meant to remain hidden? Was he now a part of this legacy? Was Max too? The dog seemed to sense the shift, more alert, more purposeful than ever before. Back at home, Daniel placed the box carefully on his desk. The journal, the letters, and the photographs seemed to pulse faintly, with an unseen energy. He knew he couldn't simply walk away from the mystery. Not now, not ever. That night, as Daniel lay awake listening to the wind whispering through the trees, he felt a presence, familiar, protective, and ancient. The forest had chosen him, or perhaps he had chosen it. The line between man and nature blurred. In the days that followed, Daniel's life changed. He spent more time in the woods, learning its rhythms, observing its hidden patterns, and uncovering small clues left behind by those who had come before him. He documented everything carefully, preparing to share the story when the time was right, but also understanding that some secrets needed to be guarded. The townsfolk noticed the change in Daniel, a quiet seriousness, a new respect for the land that bordered their homes. Some whispered that he was touched by something beyond explanation. Others believed he simply found a deeper connection to the world around him. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Daniel and Max returned to the clearing once more. The soft glow had returned, pulsing gently beneath the moss and leaves, welcoming them back. Daniel knelt beside the old metal box and ran his hand over the carvings on the stone altar nearby. He understood now that the forest's power was tied to balance, between the seen and unseen, the living and the lost. Max barked softly as if to say, "We're ready." Together, man and dog stood watch over the secret, guardians of a story that stretched across generations. Daniel knew there would be challenges ahead, moments of fear and doubt, but he also knew that some truths were worth protecting. The forest whispered around them, alive and eternal. And now, so was Daniel. No longer just a man, but a keeper of its ancient secret, forever bound to the golden woods and the echoes of a bark that changed everything.